Hello and welcome to Business Daily, coming to you from Trust Television Studio in Abuja. This is where we bring you up to the minute development in the world of business, finance, fiscal, monetary policies, among other global business developments. I am your host, Christiana Amodu Otinya. Thank you for joining in. The United Nations General Assembly just completed its 77th session, and President Muhammadu Buhari, in his address, appealed to world leaders for the debt cancellation of poor countries, emphasizing that the people of these nations face numerous challenges, including being able to service external debts. Now, this is coming at a time when Nigeria's debt increased by 2.98% on a quarter-on-quarter basis to 42.84 trillion naira, that's $103.1 billion in June 2022, from 41.60 trillion naira, that's $100.07 billion in March 2022. The country's total external debt stock out of this was 39%, amounting to $40.06 billion, and mixed reactions have trailed this development, especially with Nigeria's burgeoning debt and with the Minister of Finance restating that Nigerians has a revenue challenge. I will be joined by Dr. Emeka Okengwe, financial analyst, and he will look at all the sides of Nigeria's ballooning debt profile. It promises to be a very insightful program today. Don't go anywhere. The program will continue shortly after this short timeout. Please stay.
TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
Welcome back to the program, and thank you for still staying there with us. I have my guest with me in the studio now. He's Dr. Emeka Okengwe, economist and financial analyst, and he will be lending his voice to the discussion, talking about debt cancellation, debt forgiveness. We saw President Muhammadu Buhari at the UN General Assembly talking about how world leaders should cancel debt of developing nations and nations that are basically struggling to service this external debt. Welcome to the program, Dr. Okengwe.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you join us. Now, before we get into the meat of the matter, we put together some data that's talking about giving a background to Nigeria's debt situation, talking about Nigeria's debt profile. Where do we start from? Where we are at now? Now, according to the Debt Management Office, Nigeria's total public debt stock increased from 40.10 trillion naira as of March. Now, that's up to 42.84 trillion naira. External debt remained the same at 16.61 trillion naira. That's about $40.06 billion from Q1 to Q2 2022. 58% of external debts were concessional and semi-concessional loans from multilateral lenders such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, Afrexim Bank, and the African Development Bank, and bilateral lenders including Germany, China, Japan, India, and France. Total public debt GDP as of June 30, 2022 was at 23.06% compared to the ratio of 23.27% as of March 26, 2022, adding that the debt service to revenue ratio remained high. Now that's talking about data from the DMO. Undisbursed loans include $7.60 billion from the International Development Association, IDA, and $540 million from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Undisbursed loans also may drive Nigeria's debt to the World Bank, $12.72 billion to $21.15 billion now. So we're having a lot of billions, a lot of trillions, a lot of money is flying around. But let's take a listen to what President Muhammadu Buhari had to say when he was before world leaders at the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Please take a listen.
In spite of our efforts, humanitarian crisis will continue to ravage some of our communities. Nigeria, therefore, implores our global partners to do more to complement our endeavors. Indeed, the multifaceted challenges facing most developing countries have placed a debilitating chokehold on their fiscal space. This equally calls for the need to address the burden of unsustainable external debt by a global commitment to the expansion and extension of the debt service suspension initiative to countries facing fiscal and liquidity challenges, as well as outright cancellation for countries facing the most severe challenges.
Doctor, let me come to you now. I see you have a very, very mild smile after watching that video there. The last time we had a cancellation for Nigeria, I think it was under President Olusegun Obasanjo, 2005. We had the Paris Club and all those issues around about $18 billion. We had a forgiveness for that. And now we are having the conversation come up again, debt forgiveness. The president actually mentioned the outright cancellation. Let's have your thoughts to this.
Well, first and foremost, let's start by putting some definition to debt, because the data you had earlier aired, showed some of these debts being concessional, some of them being semi-concessional.
Yes.
Most of them being tied, to specific defined outputs. So let's start from there. So it's not as if you're just getting money that you can spend anyhow. These are monies that are tied to programs.
Yes.
So if you're going to be talking about any debt forgiveness or debt cancellation or debt reconciliation or debt whatever, it will start from how have you managed what you were given. The president had talked about the humanitarian crisis, yes, which is true. I also had expected him to talk about the climate crisis, again, which is linked to the humanitarian crisis. But what's important is what data are you presenting? Remembering that we didn't just get debt cancellation because the president had gone to say, give us debt cancellation. There was a lot of forth and back. There was a lot of negotiations. There was a lot of promises. There were a lot of, clear thinking lines of what could happen, what had happened, what was going to happen if X, Y, Z happened. So it's not enough to just say cancel debt and debts are canceled. That's the point I'm trying to make. But again, let's look at it now from, maybe I don't know if we've gotten to where we're going to be looking at debt to revenue, or do we just, stay at the unsustainability of our debt profile. If it is unsustainable, then it simply means that what we're throwing these monies against is really not working. Okay? It's either you didn't put clear key performance indicators, or you didn't milestone them, or you're not measuring. Because we're talking about less than 10 years of a first debt cancellation, and we've piled up to this amount. And then when you talk about this, a lot of these debts are coming from institutions that demand very clear, project programming, demand very clear project timelines. Why are we not, insisting on probably the M&E framework? Let's even review these projects and see what are these debts against. Okay, what infrastructure do we put against this debt? Like I keep telling you each time we have a conversation, I have no problem with borrowing. But I have every problem with borrowing and not now meeting, the expectations or outputs of where that money is going to, because that's where it turns into debt. Because if you borrow against a program that is supposed to be returning on either equity or investment, it's usually very difficult, for you to get to the point where you'll be looking for debt cancellation. What you might have is a situation now where you might need to renegotiate your timing, your programming, your percentages, but not to outright, because when you're talking about outright debt cancellation, it simply means you
Doctor,
have
I'm just going to put it to you directly.
Yes.
Does Nigeria deserve another debt cancellation? Bearing in mind that, because you just mentioned that a lot of these borrowings are tied to projects.
Are supposed to be.
They are supposed to be tied to project, okay?
Yes.
Are supposed to be tied to
Yes.
projects. And normally, when you have things like this, they are supposed to be results.
Yes.
That this is what this is for. This
Yes.
is what this is supposed to
Yes.
be for.
Yes.
Given the track record we have,
Yes.
do we deserve another cancellation in the offing, given the current realities?
That's what I'm saying. It might end up not even being a cancellation. It might end up being making a case for more money. Okay? Because remember that if you're saying, okay, let me give you a very typical example. You want to build, your rail tracks, which is some very critical infrastructure.
Sure.
You want to develop your power lines, which is another very critical infrastructure. And then you borrowed maybe $1 billion to do this. And along the line, for whatever reasons, banditry, humanitarian crises, natural causes, even the change in world currencies, production costs, a lot of things can now probably now not make you meet the expectations with that 1 billion. Now, what you'd be looking for wouldn't be to cancel the 1 billion, would it? What you'd be looking for is to now say, okay, fine, this 1 billion you're giving to me that was supposed to do 100% has only been able to do 65%. Okay, so can we be able to now restructure this loan? Okay, give me a little extension and give me more money based on X, Y, Z, so I can be able to get to where I'm going to. But if you talk about debt cancellation tied to a project, you're just simply saying that the project has failed. I mean, that's what it means for me.
Doctor, I get your angle, and I think this is another angle we should equally look at. But why in your view do you think we are not putting that argument forward of probably an extension or more monies to come in? And the president is saying, cancel our debt. Well,
because it depends on the advice being given to the president by the financial handlers. And this is why we are here, to also give the president, some second thoughts. Okay, put it out in the public and say yes. Why, instead of now, again, remember the president had mentioned humanitarian crisis, which of course we do have. Okay, remember that where he didn't mention it, but we have a lot of insurrections and insurgency that has actually distorted a lot of things. And part of the reasons why, we got into inflation, one of the major reasons was the disruptions to our food systems. Okay, was the destructions occasioned by insurgencies and insurrections. So it's not as if it's not a major problem. Okay, but what I'm trying to say is that if you're just going to be looking at the humanitarian part alone, except the president is tying insurrections, insurgencies, climate crisis to one and linking it under humanitarian crisis. Again, remember that it might even be tough for us to get this debt cancellation because we are still within range. Okay, our GDP to debt, okay, is still very, very comfortable. We're still under that threshold of 35, 40%. I think we're still at 23%.
Yes.
However, is it a good measurement, okay, of how healthy you are? No, it's not.
Doctor, I was going to come to the dichotomy of debt to GDP, debt to revenue. Because most times when this conversation on debt comes up, that dichotomy always comes to play. And like you have said, for debt to GDP, we are still within the band. And like the president said at the General Assembly, he's saying these countries are finding it difficult to service some of these debts, to pay back some of the debts. And he stated the reasons why these countries in Africa are struggling around this situation. Now, do you think this situation is peculiar? And let's also look at the hows. How can we ensure that we mitigate things like this?
Again, the president also mentioned your physical space. Okay, you see, when you talk about debt, remember that we try to pigeonhole it. First and foremost, let's understand that this money has been given to you for A, B, C, D.
Yes.
There might have been some disruptions. The first you need to do is to identify those disruptions before you start talking about cancelling. Now, it is based on the disruptions that you can begin to cancel, because if you borrow more or you don't borrow, you haven't solved the problem. All right? If you say cancel the debt and then more is not given to you, if we are talking about infrastructure, it hasn't solved it, be it critical or social. Now, if you now say, okay, cancel and don't give me, you haven't also solved it. If you now borrow more money and you have not resolved the issues that made you lose the first one, you also would never get to the end of it. So it's actually a chicken and egg thing that can only be resolved by just clear thinking, clear data, clear statistics, okay, clear evaluation, clear review of where you were, where you are, where you should be, and then the causes, or if you may, the disruptions that could have occasioned you not to get to where you should have been. Now, it could also be that it could just be the simple reasons of, the lack of forex, or maybe the forex crisis will have, or maybe high cost of forex that has eaten into the real value, okay, of now the cost you need to be able to complete that project. In that case, what you'll be needing will be more money. What you'll be needing will be more time. So you shouldn't be asking for debt cancellation. You should actually be asking for debt extension.
Doctor, I want you to speak to this issue now, because a lot of us are hearing 42 trillion, 41 trillions, and these are quite humongous sums. Are we working with a peg to our head that we are all going to pay some part of this money? Explain to me what this debt situation means to Nigerians.
What it means is that this your lovely daughter who is still suckling at your breast is owing money. Let me make it that elementary. So it's not even for you that understand it. It's for those who are unborn. Because remember, we have not even started paying. It's also important to put that out. What you're doing is to service. They're not the same thing. Okay?
Yes.
Now, you're servicing so that you can remain credit worthy. You have not even started paying back, and you can't start paying back until you complete, until you begin to generate the revenues. And right now, you're not even generating enough revenue to be able to service your debts, not to pay them. It's important to understand this very critical factor.
Yes.
That this 120% you're talking about as being what is now generating to service debt is not paying back the debt. We are not reducing the amount we are owing. We are actually just making certain that we are within that time frame of, maybe the percentages you need to pay to show that you really, really want to, you show good faith and are keeping to the terms of your agreement. Now, if again, and this is very important, we keep emphasizing it, if that money was borrowed for some project, until that project gets into, it gets completed and then kicks in, you can't get any returns from it, right? You can do 90% of your rail tracks, all right? You can even do 100% of your rail tracks. If you don't have coaches and you don't have the rolling stock, you won't earn money, okay? You can put all the whole electric poles and even put the wires. If you don't, lock it down to your base stations and your generating plants, you're not going to be generating electricity.
Yes.
And if you're not able to evacuate, you're not also going to be able to get. And if you evacuate and you're not able to put the meters to send them into houses, step them down, you're not going to get. So it's not something you can say, okay, now we've completed all the rail lines, okay, we're good to go. People are not going to be working on the rail lines to pay you money. You will need coaches.
Yes.
So we need to get a proper and clear understanding of where we are, where we need to be, where we haven't gotten there, and what we need to get there. That will be the basis of whatever it is that we'll be putting forward. Now, again, I don't think the president was actually asking for Nigeria. If I'm listening to him well, I think
correct.
he was asking for Africa. And other least developed countries. Again, too, this is where discipline. This is where transparency must come to play a part. It's like somebody borrows money from you, and then the next day you see him in a shop, shopping for new shoes and a tuxedo, and then the next day you see him somewhere spraying money, and then he comes to you to say, oh, listen, Christian, somehow I think you must forgive this debt though. That's not going to work.
That's quite an interesting analogy there, but I will hold you on your thoughts on that, and we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll be talking projections. Please stay. Welcome back. Thank you for still staying there with us. If you're just joining the program, this is Business Daily on Trust Television. Of course, we have with us in the studio here Dr. Emeka Okengo, economist and financial analyst, and he has been speaking extensively on Nigeria's debt profile, analyzing the situation and basically giving us a picture of what's really going on and what should be done to ensure that the issue of debt is tackled. Now, I want you to speak to issues around projection. Doctor, the International Monetary Fund says that by 2027, the country's debt profile would have exceeded the self-imposed 40% debt profile and hit 44%. Now, the government has insisted that it has stayed below 40%. You rightly alluded to that some time ago. What do you make of these projections, especially as it relates to the debt profile of the country?
What do you make about waking up in the morning and then you find out that your house is very close to a gully and there is rain? What do you make of it?
So this projection from the IMF, is it a tall order? Is it ambitious, or do you think we are very, very close to hitting it?
I think it's kind.
It's kind.
Yes, I don't even think it's ambitious. I think it's kind. I think it might get worse than that.
2027 is just by the corner.
I think you might even get there before 2027, the way we're going. Because you see, there's a point you get to and you spiral out of control. And I think that's where we're going to now. Because we're not understanding that there's a symbiotic relationship. There's a synergy between revenue and debt. And I think government somehow is struggling to separate the both of them by saying, no, we don't have a debt problem, we have a revenue project. And I remember, just please mark the word of the language of IMF. They use the word self-imposed. Okay, that speaks volumes. If you understand in economic development language, okay, you decide that's what it is for you. Okay, now, if you're going to be getting to 40% and above, and remember that again, even out of the debts out of the borrowings we've had, I think we still have about that 14 billion undisposed, okay, that we have not taken. The moment you take that money, you're going to be jumping to about 21 billion, or so as your total stock from the 16 billion, that you have now. And that's going to be counting, okay, against your debt, to your GDP. And if we're not going to be getting out of this, lull, out of this slide quickly, and it is so slimy that you're not going to climb out because you have strength. You need to climb out with measured steps. You need to climb out with policies that can. And I remember again, Christine, that in the next few days we're going to enter into politics.
Yes.
You're old enough to know what happens, the moment politics starts. It's going to be spending and spending and spending and spending and spending money that we're not earning. Spending money that is not coming out of productivity. Okay, spending money, a lot of this money is going to be coming from the public sources, unfortunately. So what do you think that's going to also happen, to our monetary systems? So it's going to be, what I see IMF doing is to be kind, because anything above 44% would have been to say that we've become a failed state. So I think they will just want to be a little bit diplomatic to mildly say, listen, this is where you are. But the moment you surpass that 40%, which will happen sooner than expected, 50% won't be any big deal.
Doctor, I want you to speak to issues around, a lot of people have opined that probably borrowing should be put to a halt for now. You stated just now, as you're seated here, that borrowing is not a problem, that you've never been against borrowing. You are more of towards what the monies are pegged towards and what they are pegged to. The Hydra-headed COVID monster did Nigeria it did the world, the global space, a big blow. There's a war going on between Russia and Ukraine, and there are so many external factors, external shocks that Nigeria has no control over, basically. Do you think that has probably given some sort of credence, some sort of justification to these borrowings?
Now, but the rhetoric question will be, if you stop borrowing, what happens to the projects you are borrowing against? Are you going to complete them by open system? How? How are you going to complete them? And if you don't complete them, how are you going to now be able to build that fiscal, attitude or fiscal space that the president was talking about for us to be competitive globally? So it's become a catch-22 situation. All right? But if, like I said, the first thing we should do is not to talk about borrow or no borrow. is to do some evaluation that is very thorough. Okay, if you want to call it a scoping, if you want to call it a technical audit, if you want to call it whatever, to be able to show clearly where we are, where we were, okay, what had put us where we were, where we are, okay, what to put us where we need to be, and how soon we can get there. And remembering that this is an administration that is going to come, or is coming to a close, or coming to an end, as it were. I think they have less than 7 months, for the president to finish his second tenure. There's going to be a lot of horse trading. Okay, the new administration, we don't know who it will be or which party will come. We don't know if we're going to be seeing the upset that happened that brought in this new administration. So there's going to also be a lot of sensibilities.
Doctor, I have to come in here. Time is never enough. But in 20 seconds, I want you to speak on to the fact that how all this will affect the 2023 budget, given the fact that it has been stated that there's a humongous deficit already.
Well, it's one now we don't have time. Remember, we're going to be borrowing 11 trillion if we're going to be able to fund the 2023 capital budget.
Yes.
So they say. So, and I remember that way, our revenue is sliding. We're not having revenues. That's not good enough. But again, like I tell you each time, it is never a dead nail. All we need to do is to be able to be optimistic and then be more constructive in our thinking, who can pull through.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emeka Okengwu, economist and financial analyst, speaking to what Nigeria can do to ensure that the debt situation is controlled and managed properly. He did mention salient questions that need to be asked. When we have answers to those questions, of course, we are going to see a kind of positive movement coming for the Nigerian economy. Also, as the electioneering season takes full gear, it is important to state that the economy should not, at this point, be relegated to the back seat. Thank you for investing your time with us on the program today, and that's where we draw the curtains on the program today. Don't forget you can follow our social media platforms for more updates in the world of business and major news making the rounds in the country. My name is Christiana Amodu Otinya. Enjoy the rest of your day.